All right, if y'all don't have this catechism, you are missing out. You need to get it. The catechism explained an exhaustive exposition of the Christian religion with special reference to the present state of society and the spirit of the age, a practical manual, Spirago and Clarke, 1800s. Now, for more modern day issues like social issues, we have to turn to the new catechism. But for just like, the dogmas and the teachings that have always been around, I think this one explains it the best. So today we are going to read the doctrine of the Catholic Church alone gives salvation, because I think this is a hard one and it's mostly misunderstood. And I think the people that point to the fact that nobody outside the Catholic Church can be saved, they're not entirely accurate. And the people who say, but they're probably more accurate than the people who run around talking about if you're a good person, you'll be saved sort of thing, even if you're not in the church, because that's not entirely accurate and that gives people false hope. So let's see what this one has to say. So, the Catholic Church alone gives salvation, i.e. the Catholic Church alone possesses those means which lead to salvation. The doctrine of Christ, the means of salvation appointed by Christ, and the teachers and guides of the church established by Christ. The church cannot teach that truth and error lead equally well to salvation. She makes no declaration as to who is saved, but states only what is necessary for salvation. The judgment of particular individuals is left to the God who searches hearts. Her doctrine is not a declaration of intolerance to the individual, but of intolerance of error, such as an intolerance as God himself expressed when he forbade false gods to appear before him. So far is the church from hating those outside her pale that in the public prayers of Good Friday she begs God's mercy for them. The persecutions of the Middle Ages formed no part of the work of the church, which desired not the death but the conversion of the sinner. It was the civil power which used force to repress heretics because as a rule they disturbed the public peace and morality. The church is the way to salvation. It differs in this respect from the synagogue. The latter merely pointed out the way of salvation in the distant future, while the church claims itself to be the true way. The Catholic Church is distinct from the heretical churches which have corrupted Christ's doctrine and have rejected the means of grace, especially Mass and penance. Their way is a roundabout way, or the wrong way. The further one goes out from the right path, says St. Augustine, the further he is from the goal of his journey. Hence, every man is bound to become a member of the Catholic Church. Some will say that a man ought not to change his religion. They might just as well argue that a man may keep an inheritance which his father obtained unjustly. Others say one faith is as good as another, and all lead equally well to heaven. This is to profess indifferentism. It is certain that one religion only can be the true one, i.e. the one revealed by God, and reason alone would tell us that the truth is what we should aim at. It is absurd to suppose that God is unconcerned whether man adore him or sticks and stones, or whether Christ be regarded as his son or as a blasphemer. Why should Christ, and after him the apostles, preach the gospel amid so much persecution? If it were of no moment what a man believed. Why were the apostles so vehement in denouncing those who perverted the teaching of Christ? Why should God have converted Saul and sent an angel to Cornelius? The apostles gave the reason. There is no other name under heaven given to men whereby we must be saved. And Christ said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh to the Father but by me. Hence it is that so many eminent people enter the church despite the sacrifices entailed. Queen Christina, the only daughter of Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden, the arch enemy of the Catholics, studied the Catholic teaching and was persuaded of its truth. And as the laws of the land forbade her to practice her faith, she resigned her crown and spent the rest of her days in Rome. So too in the beginning of the century, Count Stolberg resigned his post on his conversion. In England during the last few decades, very many most distinguished men have entered the church, especially Cardinals Newman and Manning. Even from Judaism, there have been remarkable conversions. And then this is probably the most confusing part, where this is where the arguments come in. Whoever through his own fault remains outside the church will not be saved. And so where the arguments come in is what is the definition of through his own fault? And so I would argue that today we all have access to the internet. We have resources at our fingertips, so there's really no excuse for being ignorant. But I will say this, there is another side to it. There's so much information being pumped out at us that people are almost leery of the trying to find information, because who's to say what's true and what's not, because there's so many sides. So I understand that argument too. So it's interesting. So a man who, knowing the Catholic Church to be the true one, leaves it, say to make a good marriage or to push on his business, or for some such unworthy motive, will not be saved. And so that's interesting. They don't say a man who believed, they say knowing. So maybe that's a step above hearing. So maybe if they just heard, I'm not sure. So that, and again, what is the definition of knowing? I guess we would have to look at that. So a man knowing the church is true and leaves will not be saved. So too of the man who from a cowardly fear of the reproaches or the disesteem of others does not enter the church. So being a coward is not an excuse. The same is true of the man who, having solid doubts as to whether his church is the true one, takes no pains to find out the truth. So that's interesting. So if you're trying to figure out if you're in the correct denomination or not, and you take no pains to actually seek out the truth, then you are liable. Such as these loved the darkness better than the light. He cannot save God. He cannot have God for a father who has not the church for a mother, says St. Cyprian. He who has not Christ for a head, are the words of St. Augustine, cannot be saved. And he who does not belong to the body of Christ, i.e. to the church of Christ, has not Christ for his head. He who breaks away from the church separates himself from Christ. Council of Lateran. If, however, a man through no fault of his own remains outside the church, he may be saved if he lead a God-fearing life. So I've heard others explain it that he would have to maintain his state of grace, for example, from baptism. So no, mortal sins, things like that. For such a one is in all intents and purposes a member of the Catholic Church. The majority of men who have been brought up in heresy think that they belong to the true church. Their error is not due to hatred of God. So this would apply to the Protestants, most of them of today, the ones that don't hate, don't have a special hatred. But the majority of men who have been brought up in heresy think that they belong to the true church. Their error is not due to hatred of God. A man who leads a good life and has the love of God in his heart really belongs to the church, and such a one is saved not by his heresy, but by belonging to the church. And again, I've heard other people talk about saints talking about this point as no mortal sin sort of thing. St. Peter said, "In every nation he that feareth God and worketh justice is acceptable to him." The Catholic Church, says St. Gregory the Great, embraces all the just from Abel to the last of the elect at the end of the world. All who lived up to their lights were Christians, though they might have been looked upon as godless. Socrates among the Greeks, Abraham and Elias among the Jews, they do not belong to the body of the church. That is, they are not externally in union with the church, but they are of the soul of the church, i.e. they have the sentiments which the members of the church should have. Thus, the Catholic Church has members both visible and invisible. The visible members are those who have been received into the church by baptism. The following are not members. This is where it gets a little confusing. So the visible members are those who have been received into the church by baptism. The following are not members, talking about visible members: the unbaptized, heathens, Jews, Mohammedans, formal heretics, Protestants, and schismatics, the Greeks, those who were excommunicated. The invisible members are those who, without any fault of their own, are outside the church leading God-fearing lives. The visible members of the church are called living or dead members. So this would be the actual baptized Catholics. There's two groups of them. There's visible and there's living or dead. According as they are in the state of sanctifying grace or not. It is an error to think that those who have fallen into grave sin, so talking about fallen away Catholics who are living in sin, it is an error to think that they are no longer members of the church. The church is like a field in which grow both wheat and cockle, or like a net which contains both fish, both good and bad. It is not enough to belong to the church. A man should also live up to his belief. Otherwise, his membership will help only to his greater condemnation. So what does that mean? That means the most liable ones at the judgments, if you will be the dead visible members of the church, the fallen away Catholics, the ones me and you sacrifice for endlessly and pray for and that sort of thing. So I guess that's why I try not to comment too much on like Protestants. I know I've been commenting on them a lot with this charismatic movement because I don't believe we should be taking advice from heretics, to be quite frank with you. Whether they are saved or not saved, if there's a possibility for salvation or there's not, I leave that up to God. But I don't believe we should be taking practices from them. That I know. So anyway, I wanted to just go over this because it's super confusing. Because on one side, you have people who are like, absolutely no salvation. If you're not a visible member, then you can't be saved. And that's not true. But I think on the other side, you have people greatly exaggerating and giving false hope that if you're just a good person, you'll be saved. And that's very dangerous and also not true. So we have to look at it in a balanced way and constantly keep the catechism teaching in mind. For the most part, though, the people I'm surrounded by, for them, there's no salvation outside the Catholic Church because they are all dead, visible members. So that's why I constantly say it. But I'm looking at it in a narrow perspective. I don't care so much, maybe that's horrible, about the Protestants and stuff like that, although I do pray for them and I do have Protestant friends, and I will interject some enlightenment into their, the ones that are open to it, into their, into our conversation, some Catholic enlightenment, and hope for the best. But the ones that I sacrifice for and the majority of my prayers are concerned with are the dead visible members, because they're going to be more liable because they were, to whom much is given, much is expected, sort of thing. So anyway, I want to just point that out. And that's it. Hope you all have a great evening. Joan of Arc Media out.